Hello BookTube, and welcome to another weekly reading vlog. These are the books that I've been working on this past week. So, how to teach for exams, I finally just finished off this week. I had, after a very good first week with this book, done what I quite often do, is just put it on the back burner and was only getting a few pages read each week. And I've decided that I'm going to try to narrow down my reading list so I can focus on just a couple books. These are the two books that I want to focus on for the moment. So I thought I might as well just carve out some time and finish this book off so that I can just be done with it. So that's what I did. I read the final 30 pages or so of this book this past week. There's some extra exercises in the back, but I skipped those. Those would only have been about 10 pages anyways. And now this book is done, which means I am down to two books. I have a bad habit, if you've been following this channel, I have a bad habit of starting new books before I finish old ones and then just have too many books to read given my limited reading time. But two is something I feel comfortable with. And then the comic books, but comic books, I tend to count those separately. So in terms of actual books, we're just down to these two. And with these two, I've decided, I think I may have mentioned that this last week, but Journey to the West, I have feel like nearing the end of this 4-volume set, but I'm finally realizing how to approach this book. It's not so much a novel as it is a collection of stories with the same characters in it. And it does go on and on and on, but it's not meant to be plowed through. It's meant to be savored or enjoyed, or, you know, in the 16th century when it was written, it would brought down from the shelves on a cold, snowy night maybe, and read beside a cackling fire with the family gathered round. And I think you're supposed to enjoy it episode by episode instead of trying to plow through it. So that's what I'm going to try and do for the remaining chapters that I have left, which is only 15, but it is still, you know, a few hundred pages. And so this week I read through one episode, and then when I got to the end of that episode, I just stopped for the week and concentrated my reading time instead on Wolf Hall. So that one episode, the priest, let me back up. They're traveling west. They get reports by the Bodhisattva Guinan, the female Buddha, who comes down in disguise, that in the kingdom there's a king who's on a mission to kill all the Buddhist monks. And he's so far killed 996 of them, I think that's right. And he wants to get to 1,000. No, he wants to get to 10,000, sorry. And he's killed 9,996, so he's got 4 more monks to go. And there are 4 monks in this traveling party, with the head monk, who I usually call the monk, the monkey, the pig, and Friar Sand. I guess not counting the horse. So they decide that they cannot go through this kingdom as monks because they'll be arrested and killed. Now, there's arguably an inconsistency here, because the monkey has demonstrated numerous times that he's got a lot of supernatural powers and can fight lots of supernatural beings. So why the monkey is worried about a human king doesn't quite make sense. But again, presumably these stories originated as different stories before they were collected into this book. At any rate, they are worried about it. They talk about, I think it was Pig's idea to wait and grow their hair out so they're not dressed like monks, because monks have shaved heads. But they decide that it would take too long, 6 months, to grow their hair out, and they need to get on with the journey now. So Monkey goes into the town and steals some clothes from some traveling merchants. and they put on the clothes, and they have hats covering their bald heads. And they go in and they stay at a hotel. Um, but then they have to. Monkey orders a first class service, but that means that with the first class service, that they're going to kill the cows and the chickens and cook up some meat. And being Buddhist, they can't have meat and they can't have animals being killed for them. So Monkey convinces them to have a vegetarian meal because I forget what the reason was. Maybe it was because of the month on the calendar, on the lunar calendar or something. Same thing that they were going to bring them women to sleep with. What would be the polite term for that? Courtesans. But Monkey convinces them not to do that either. He can't say we're monks, so he keeps having to make up excuses. But then they're worried that when they sleep at night, their hats might fall off and reveal them to be monks. So Monkey gets the hotel owners to agree to put them in this big giant trunk. But also he lets word go out that they're traveling merchants with a lot of money. So then this gets passed through the town gossip chain, and a whole bunch of bandits come and steal the trunk with them inside it. And then the king's cavalry and army chase down the bandits, and the royal guard, I guess it's called, and they bring the trunk back to the royal palace. Where they are in danger of being discovered now, because as soon as the trunk gets open, they will see 4 monks. But Monkey changes shape again, like he can do, and turns into an ant, and with his cudgel changes the shape of his cudgel into a drill, drills a little hole through the trunk, is able to come out, and then Monkey. He's able to make duplicates of himself by pulling out hairs on his body. So he makes all these duplicates of himself, which shave the heads of everybody in the palace while they're all sleeping. It's surprising they don't wake up. I think there was something about sleeping insects maybe as well. I'm obviously having trouble remembering some of the finer details. But somehow Monkey's able to shave all their heads, including the emperor. The emperor, the king, the queen, all the guards, and so they all wake up and find out they've all had their heads shaved, and they now all look like monks now. The king is convinced this is heaven's revenge on him. So then when the trunk is opened and the monk and his disciples, the pig, the monkey, and Friar Sand, are revealed, the king actually doesn't want to kill them anymore. He's had a complete change of heart, and he's turned over a new leaf. And then they get their passports stamped, and they are out on their journey. And that is the end of that episode. What's a little bit odd is I think this is the first time. I don't know. I've already revealed that my memory is a little bit bad, but I think this is the first time where we have a story which spans a chapter and a half. Usually the stories end with the chapter breaks. Now, sometimes the stories can be 2 chapters or 3 chapters, but I don't think we ever have a story end in the middle of a chapter, but that's what happens in this one. So this story I've just retold is chapter 84, and that's the first part of chapter 85. And then the second part of 85 goes into another story about a demon. Now, that's where I stopped reading for this week, because that seemed to be where the previous story ended. But since I haven't finished the chapter, I'm not sure if it will all tie together somehow, or if this will turn out to be kind of one connected story. But assuming it's not, this is the first time one storyline has ended in the middle of a chapter, and then another storyline has begun. Sorry, I can't talk. It's late at night and I'm sleepy. I'm using that as my excuse. Where was I? Yeah. Unless I'm forgetting something. First time a storyline has ended in the middle of a chapter and then a new storyline has begun. But I just stopped reading there. So that's up to page 1958 in volume 4. And then I'll pick it up from there this week and read the new storyline. And then the rest of my attention has been with Wolf Hall. So last week I had read up to page 184, and I've read about 100 pages. I'm on 292. I've finished all of part 5, and I'm finishing up. Sorry, I finished all of part 3, and I'm finishing up part 4. And when I get to the end of part 4, I'm going to check in with Steve Donahue again, because on the BookTube, the book club videos he made this past spring, he did one video for parts 1 and 2, one for part 3 and 4, and one for part 5 and 6. So I'm finished. I'm in the middle of part 4 now, so haven't watched Steve's second video. And it looks like, how many pages do I have to the end of part 4? Looks like I have about another 50 pages to the end of part 4. There's a lot in here, so it's probably no good me trying to summarize everything that was in here while I was reading it. It's, for the most part, it's pleasant reading, and for the most part, I would even say it's relatively easy reading. For the most part, there are still some paragraphs that confuse me. There were still a couple of paragraphs I had to read twice. So those are in there, but on the whole, it's relatively easy reading. I'm glad I know the basics of the history here, because there are some major events that do seem to get skipped over, like the king's decision to break with the Pope and establish the Church of England seems to have been mentioned almost as an aside, like Cromwell saying, yeah, we're doing that. We need the House of Commons to vote on it, something like that. So, yeah, knowing the basic history definitely helps here. I'm also realizing, the more I get into this, that there are a lot of, I don't know, maybe what you might call Easter eggs thrown in here. Like on page 186, Thomas Cromwell is going to a party at Thomas More's place, a dinner party. He and Thomas More are still on relatively friendly terms at this point. So they're meeting Thomas More, and Stephen Gardner, another character, is with them. And Stephen Gardner says to More, he says, "Is your son-in-law, Roper, with us today?" Gardner asks. "A pity. I hoped to see him change his religion again. I wanted to witness it." "A garden tour?" More offers. "I thought that we might see him sit down, a friend of Luther, as formerly he was, yet come back to the church by the time they bring in the currants and gooseberries." "Will Roper is now settled," More says, "in the faith of England and of Rome. He says it's not really a good year for soft fruit." So that reference to Will Roper kind of confused me. Like, what are they talking about? But if you go on Wikipedia, Will Roper was Thomas More's son-in-law and had been a Lutheran. And then I think he had originally been a Catholic, because everyone was originally a Catholic then. Then he converted to Lutheranism, and then More converted him back to Catholicism when he became Thomas More's son-in-law. And according to Wikipedia, he's a prominent character in the stage play and the movie of the same name, A Man for All Seasons, which is about Thomas More, which I've not seen and would be interested in seeing at this point, although I'm not sure I'm going to track down a copy out here in Vietnam. I already looked to see if there was a good quality version of the full movie on YouTube, and I couldn't find it. That's usually my go-to. But anyways, point being, I guess, if you were familiar with the stage play or the movie A Man for All Seasons, you probably caught that reference to Will Roper. And if you're not familiar with it, you probably missed that reference. And Steve Donahue in his videos says that there are references to The Other Boleyn Girl, another historical fiction about the Tudor era. And he also says there are echoes of Shakespeare's Henry VIII in here. So, yeah, there are some things in here which I'm aware that are going over my head. I've got some knowledge of this era, but not complete by any means. And I think I was a little bit sharper on it 10 years ago, because 10 years ago was right when I was reading Monarchy by David Starkey, or doing it as an audiobook. And when I worked through the Showtime cable show, The Tudors, a lot of these characters were the same in that show, but have somewhat faded in my mind now. I also, when I was watching The Tudors, I also binge watched it at the time. I had the whole box set. I got it at the riverfront in Cambodia for it was a pirated CD collection, but whatever. So, yeah, you know what it is like when you binge a whole series. It doesn't stick in your mind as well. You kind of binge the whole thing, and then you remember some key moments afterwards, but you also forget a lot. Anyways, yeah, the other thing, I mean, there's lots of other things happening in these 100 pages. But the other thing is the religious persecution element is going on here. So it's talking, this is before England becomes Protestant, so when England is still Catholic, and talking about the lowlords and who are being burned at the stake, or people who people who are just guilty of reading the Bible in English. Tyndale's translation of the Bible, it was banned at that time to read the Bible in English, so they were getting burned at the stake. And of course, Thomas Cromwell is sympathetic to the Protestants, and Thomas More is sympathetic to the Catholics. I did finally read Christopher Hitchens' review of this book. I think I'd mentioned that, or actually maybe I didn't mention it. Maybe I wrote it on my blog but didn't mention it on this YouTube channel. Steve Donahue made me aware that Christopher Hitchens had written a review of this book. Yeah, I think Steve Donahue said, anytime Christopher Hitchens and I both really like a book, then you have to take notice. And so I searched Google Christopher Hitchens Wolf Hall, and there's a book review he wrote in The Atlantic some 13 years ago. And I couldn't read it because I had to subscribe to The Atlantic to read it. But I think The Atlantic is like one of those magazines where you get a certain amount of free articles a month or a year or whatever. Because when I went to my computer at work, I was able to read it from my work computer with no problem. It just depends what computer you access it from some of the time. So I did actually read Christopher Hitchens' review of this book. And Christopher Hitchens, there's a lot of stuff in this book. Christopher Hitchens' review, if my memory serves, was very narrowly focused on the religious aspects of this book. And I guess fair enough, he was in his atheist mode at that point in his life. Yeah, Christopher Hitchens mentions that, it talks about graphic descriptions of what it was like for these people to be burned at the stake, and why they suffered more on a windy day because it took longer for the flames to get to them. And they're just in the few pages I finished reading just a couple hours ago. It's talking about a Lullard being burned at the stake, and a very detailed description of what that would actually like for someone to be burned at the stake like that. Talking about, well, I don't want to spoil anyone's dinner, so I won't quote from that part just now, and I won't say exactly what's in there, but yeah, it really makes you think about, wow, that kind of stuff went on back then. You read about people being burned at the stake, and you're like, yeah, all this crazy stuff happened in history. But then to kind of slow down and linger on that scene of what it was like to see someone getting burned at the stake, and you're like, wow, they talk about how terrible and cruel human beings can be to each other. And, as Christopher Hitchens is all too happy to point out, all done under the guise of religion and Christian charity and all that kind of stuff. Christopher Hitchens, in his review, says something interesting which I never thought about before. He says George Orwell's book 1984 was based or took inspiration from the Protestant Reformation. So there was a ruling party which had control of the truth, and they had a secret book which they could read and nobody else could read. Because, at that time, before the Protestant Reformation in England, at the time that this book is taking place, it was a crime to read the Bible in English. You could be burned at the stake for reading the Bible in English. Now, this is something I forget where I had heard this before. I think this was from This Sceptered Isle. I had learned it. But, the Tyndale's translation and people being burned alive for reading Tyndale's translation of the Bible, I had known about that a little bit before. Yeah, it's just crazy. Some of the history of religion, isn't it? There's a lot more stuff going on in this 100 pages, but I'm going to leave it at that. I mean, just to reiterate, there are things in this book which are going over my head. On the whole, it's readable, though. Somebody commented last week that they had been intimidated by this book. On the whole, it's readable. Maybe I'll come back more about that when I finish the book. And yeah, no point in me making pronouncements before I've even finished the thing, huh? But that's my impression so far. And then Marvel Horror Lives Again. I've read from last week. I was at page 1050. I managed 75 pages. I'm at 1124. Reading the Ulysses Bloodstone stories. So 75 pages for a comic book probably isn't that much. My pace is slowing down a little bit on this, in part because I'm finding these last sections a bit boring, plotting, maybe a little bit by the numbers. There's an interesting idea here about a centuries-long fight between Ulysses Bloodstone and the conspiracy over these gemstones, but this section's in black and white. Well, I guess black and white's not the end of the world, but the execution I'm finding a little bit boring. But yeah, still 75 pages isn't terrible, huh? And really getting near the end of this book. I think I've got less than 100 pages to go. Yeah, less than 100 pages to go now. So maybe even finish this up this week. We'll see. And that's all my reading for this week. I will see you next week, BookTube. Have a good week.